Chapter 20 of The Airplane Boys Among the Clouds. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Airplane Boys Among the Clouds by John Luther Langworthy. Chapter 20. The Rival Aviators. "It's what I call a blooming shame, that's what," declared Andy. "Here's the day of the big race come along, and it's within an hour of the time set for the start from Bloomsbury High School campus, and the measly old weatherman has to dole us out a probable rain sign. Going to upset all our calculations, sure, and disappoint all those fine people over in Hazenhurst." "That's where the shoe pinches, Frank," spoke up Larry. "He's just thinking about one pretty little girl who will be waiting to wave her handkerchief when the hero of the bulldog scrap comes whizzing around that old Liberty pole." "Am I?" demanded Andy indignantly. "Just you take a look yonder at the western horizon and tell me what you see there." "A low-down bank of clouds, that's a fact," Andy replied the other candidly. "But only for this race business you wouldn't take any particular notice of that same. You remember it looked just as bad the other day, and petered out without ever giving us a drop of rain." "Yes, that's so, Larry," observed Frank. "I've been watching those clouds for some little while now. They don't seem to be climbing up as far as I could see." "But I sure saw a little something right then that may have been lightning," put in Elephant. "I reckon you did," Frank admitted, "for I saw it too. One thing's sure, there's going to be no trial for elevation today. Nothing could tempt me to bore up thousands of feet with a dark storm threatening below. Even if we escaped the wind, we might be kept up there until night came on." "Excuse me, if you please," remarked Andy with a shudder. "It's bad enough up there on a bright sunshiny day, let alone night, with a storm howling below. The judges won't allow us such a thing. We'll put off altitude until a better day." "Percy will be mad, though," said Elephant. "He just hates to give in, and if they let him have his way, he'd defy you to make the trial, no matter what the weather." "Well, that's why I made sure there were sensible men on the jury that's going to decide this race," Frank remarked confidently. "I happen to remember what a hothead Percy is. Well, I'm ready to meet him in any reasonable test. To prove which of our aeroplanes is the better, I don't want to act like a crazy aviator. There's danger enough, goodness knows, at the best, without taking chances that no sensible person would consider." "Is everything all ready, Frank?" asked the other bird boy. "I believe so. Wait till I lock the shop, and then we'll take a little spin before heading for the campus, just to warm the engine up." "There's nothing lying around, is there?" asked Andy anxiously, "in case a fellow took a notion to break in here while the circus is on in town, and everybody interested in our biplanes." "I've made sure of that," smiled his cousin, adding significantly, "I suppose you're thinking of Mr. Marsh right now." "That's who I am," came the prompt reply. "Don't you see how he would have loads of time to get in and rummage around while all of us were off? Even Colonel Josiah is bound to be at the high school building this p.m. Perhaps Mr. Marsh had that game in mind when he asked so many questions about the race." "Oh, you suspicious chap," laughed Frank. "But rest easy, Andy. Mr. Marsh could look a long while through here without discovering any sign of my experiments, or at any rate, what success I had met with in the same. If he goes to all the trouble to get into the shop, he'll have his work for nothing." "And I'm going to make it a point to keep an eye out for that same gent," declared Larry positively. "And if he vanishes from the campus, just you make up your mind your Uncle Larry will be camping on his trail. I just like to see him breaking into a private building, no matter if it is only the workshop of two boys. Let him try it, if he wants to see what nice quarters Chief Waller has in the Bloomsbury lockup. You hear me? After you give us the shove-off, boys, get on your wheels and hike for the campus. We expect you to be there to start us in the race. Something depends on a clever getaway, you know," Frank observed, as he locked the door and put the key in his pocket. A short time later the biplane rose swiftly, like a hawk that had been startled, and began to mount upward in gigantic circles, the faithful little Kincaid engine throbbing with the regularity of heartbeats. As directed, no sooner had Larry, Elephant, and Nat seen the bird boys well off than they mounted their waiting wheels, brought over for this especial purpose, and started for town. Anybody could see without trouble that Bloomsbury was in the throes of a tremendous excitement that afternoon. People abandoned their houses in crowds and flocked toward the campus of the high school, which seemed to be the hub of a vast wheel, the squads of citizens taking the part of spokes, all headed toward the common center. And nearly everybody seemed to be turning around to observe the biplane, which was plainly visible as Frank and Andy warmed the engine up for speedy use. All sorts of remarks reached the three boys as they slackened their pace once inside the limits of the town. The vast majority of the crowd seemed to be in favor of the Bird Boys, though of course there were some who sympathized with the opposition. Not because they cared so much for Percy and Sandy, as of a desire to be on the other side of the fence. Some boys are built that way. They call it taking the weaker part, but in reality it is a spirit of contrariness that pushes them on. And when they reached the vicinity of the campus, Larry and his comrades were astonished to see the multitude that had gathered to witness the novel event. All sorts of vehicles were parked in the nearby side streets, from big touring cars and little electrics to farm wagons and even a hayrick, on which a dozen country people had ridden some 10 miles with a desire to witness the miracle of the 20th century, the Flying Boys of Bloomsbury. "Oh, my, where did they all come from?" gasped Elephant, as he looked around the sea of faces. "Thank goodness," remarked Larry. "Chief Waller is on deck with all his force to keep the crowds back. Only for that, how would the aeroplanes ever get started?" Look yonder," said stuttering Nat, pointing as he stood beside his wheel. There he is, fellows." "You mean the mysterious Mr. Marsh," echoed Larry. "So I see, and his friend the great editor is with him too. If I get a chance to have a few words with that Mr. Longley, I'm going to ask him just why it is we haven't received a copy of his paper containing the account of Jules' capture. He didn't keep his promise to me, and I don't like that way of doing things." "There's Percy with his biplane over yonder, holding a levee," remarked Elephant. "He looks as happy as a clam," said Larry. "You know his way, fellows. 10 to 1 he's dead sure he's got this race clinched already. See him shake hands with Bessie Clinton. I can just guess how he's saying what he means to do to Frank and Andy. Huh," finishing his sentence with a snort of disgust. "The feller that crows last crows loudest," observed Elephant. "Well, you ain't got that just correct, Elephant," remarked Larry, letting his frown disappear in a grin. "But it means the same thing anyhow. Let's find a place to stack our wheels and get around. The chief will let us go inside the lines, for he knows we belong to Frank's crowd and are needed in the push-off." Just as Larry had said, the big police head met him with a warm smile of welcome. His sympathies were positively with the Bird Boys, though he would do his duty impartially as he saw it. But Larry and his friends had brought him a piece of rare good luck in the capture of the escaped convict, and for this alone the chief had a warm feeling in his big heart for them all. Presently a cry went up. "They're coming! The Bird Boys are headed this way, fellows. Get back, everybody, and give 'em plenty of room to land. Move back. Make way there." The police assisted in driving the dense crowd still further away from the open campus, where the aeroplane would be likely to drop under Frank's clever manipulation of the levers. It happened that the big campus of the high school was entirely destitute of trees, being in reality a wide field on which many of the town sports took place from time to time. In this way it offered a very good starting point for an affair of this sort. Every sound was hushed as the biplane circled the field like a bird seeking a favorable spot on which to alight. Then Frank headed straight for the vacant place left on purpose for the second aeroplane. When he landed, and after running a short distance on the green, came to a full stop, a storm of cheers broke out. Evidently the Bird Boys had a host of warm adherents among the attendant crowds. Frank did not allow himself to pay the least attention to the shouting lookers-on. They would never see him bowing and scraping before the race had ever been started, like Percy had done. Time enough for all that later on. "Look at him, would you?" said Larry indignantly, as he joined the young aviators. "Percy thinks all that shouting was for him. See him waving his hand and laughing. Why, he's being crowned with the wreath of victor already, in imagination. Bah! He makes me tired, that's what." "Don't pay any attention to him, Larry," smiled Frank. I think he does that on purpose to make some of us mad. Percy generally has a reason in everything he does. He's a sly one. It seems to give him a heap of pleasure, and I'm sure it doesn't hurt us one little bit. Let him have his fun. Well, perhaps he's smart enough to know that this is the only chance he'll get to listen to the cheers, remarked Andy grimly. For when the game is over, Percy is only going to be found among the also-rans. That's it, crowed Larry gleefully. But Frank said nothing. If he believed that he would have an easy thing of it and leave his rival far in the lurch, he gave no expression to such views. Here come the judges, remarked Elephant, and they're going to explain just what the conditions of the race will be. Yes, Percy has quit laughing. He looks sober enough right now. Listen to what Judge Perrin says, fellows. The judge had gained a spot between the rival biplanes where he could be easily heard. Then he started to explain just what the committee having the race in charge had decided the rules should be. In the first place, he remarked, it would be utterly suicidal for the young aviators to think of trying for height on such a threatening day. That would be left until the second afternoon, to be settled then, if both parties were agreed. After that he went on to state how points were to be given for expert management of the aeroplane, as seen from the start and return, also for speed. The time of reaching the Liberty Pole at Hazenhurst was to be taken there by a member of the committee sent over for that purpose. After leaving that town, the rival biplanes were to circle the peak of Old Thundertop 3 times, and last of all make a landing on the campus. Any questions either of you before the word is given to start? Asked the gentleman in charge of arrangements, after he had finished reading his rules. Neither of the contestants evidently had anything to ask. They knew what they had to do only too well, and both were like restive horses, awaiting the tap of the bell or the crack of the pistol to be off on the jump. The vast crowd surged and swayed, everybody wishing to see the start, which would prove a novel sight to many of the country people at least. Once the aeroplanes had soared aloft, their flight could be watched without trouble. Frank and Andy had mounted to their places, and an air of expectancy hung over the broad campus. After they had left the earth, it would be a straightaway course for both contestants in the direction of Hazenhurst. "Are you ready?" asked the starter in loud voice. Both replied in the affirmative. "Then go!" And with the words, the judge fired a pistol into the air. Instantly the whir of the motors was heard, and with a rush along the ground the contesting biplane started upon the long race. End of chapter 20.